Johann Sebastian Bach is often regarded by classical and jazz musicians alike as one of the best composers of all time. Where lies the secret of this universal admiration? What makes his very complex music still understandable by so many people? In order to understand his musical thought, we are going to read a very interesting book, The Musical Guide by Friedrich Erhardt Niedt. Thanks to this treatise, we are going to understand how Bach taught music to his pupils and eventually, how he thought music in general. Niedt, born in the German city of Jena in 1674, was a music theorist and composer. In Niedt's time, one of the newest features of European music was the basso continuo, in English figured bass. This system permitted to musicians to realize and play the whole harmony by just looking at the bass part. Germans were late in embracing this new technique. They mostly used a notation system based on tablature, who made the adoption of figured bass impractical, if not impossible. Niedt felt that German people had to adopt the system currently used in Italy and France to follow the latest musical innovations. So, Niedt wrote this book as a practical guide for beginners willing to learn the figured bass, or, as he called it, the Generalbass. This book was the first of its kind in German, and Bach adopted it with minor changes to teach harmony and composition to his pupils in Leipzig. Now that we had some information about the context of the book, let's move on and read what's inside. After a very long introduction, full of mythological and allegorical characters, the first part of the treatise begins by concisely explaining the basis of harmony and notation: clefs, intervals, and triads. Niedt then proceeds to introduce the first musical example. This simple harmonic progression. I'm sure this will sound familiar to most of you. It's a very simple progression, and the chords we find in here are the same of many songs you could actually hear on the radio. Through the rest of the book, this will be the basis over which different kinds of musical structures will be constructed. To make the harmonic vocabulary richer, he then introduces chord inversions, prepared dissonances, and finally modulations. One of the last examples sounds like this. The first part of the book ends here. You can see, and it's very interesting, that Baroque music had foundations over simple and very clear rules that are still considered today to be the basis of classical harmony. But we still need something to create the interesting complexity we have in Bach. The answer is in the next and most interesting part of this treatise, the second. At the end of the first part of his book, Niedt states clearly that the few rules he exposes are the only rules you need to know to understand Generalbass. What you will learn from now on is how to make what you already know sound better and more interesting. In one word, variation. Niedt gives tables and tables of examples about possible transformation of the same melodic interval. Let's follow an example. Niedt starts with the smallest of intervals, the second. Pretty straight, huh? Niedt says, all you have to do if you want it to sound more interesting is this. Or this. Or this. Or this. And so on. You have an exhaustive list of possible variations of a second, and all of this will work with the harmony. The book goes on by providing examples for each melodic interval in different styles and meters. Following the same principles, the simple harmonic progression of the beginning is transformed into dance forms and preludes, like this. Or these. Here lies one of the most interesting revelations of this book. The complexity of Baroque music is a complexity built on a very clear and simple basis. No matter how far you will go in virtuosity and articulation, there will always be some kind of solid structure lying underneath, woven in the fabric of the music, some kind of consistent harmonic formula that will ensure the music has a direction and will be followed by listeners. When you hear something like this, you should keep in mind that it was written over this very simple structure. The third part of the book is unfortunately left unfinished because Niedt died before completing it. It was supposed to focus on counterpoint. We still have the introduction and some informations about canons. Still, there is something really interesting to learn in there. As resumed by Wikipedia, regarding counterpoint, Niedt calls it the musical equivalent of spelling and suggests that counterpoint arises from the realization of figured bass. Niedt insists that mere counterpoint contains no beauty and that one can discern no complete meaning or context from it. As opposed to pedagogues who developed rules for composing counterpoint on its own terms, such as Johann Fuchs, Niedt attempts instead to extend his figured bass instruction to encompass the subject of counterpoint. This is something very important of Bach's musical language. No matter how complex the counterpoint, there will always be a strong harmonic logic behind the music. That's probably the reason why Beethoven called Bach the immortal god of harmony. I'm sure Bach was so expert in this style that he thought music already in its most articulated and ornamented form. But the simple structure is there nevertheless, guiding the listener through. Here lies what is perhaps the main or one of the main reasons of the almost unconditional love that Bach enjoys nowadays. His music is rich and full, but at the same time solidly grounded on a stable harmonic language, which is still shared by a great part of today's music. When we hear Bach's music, we have the pleasure of unconsciously hearing the same harmony we already know so well, presented in such a way that it sounds always fresh and beautifully crafted.